For me, camaraderie is like the thing, not to go too far off a tangent, but I grew up in foster care and all I ever wanted was a family. Like that was it. That's what I wanted. And so when my recruiter told me that the Navy is like a family, I was like, sign me up, put me in, right? And then like a year or so into it, I heard that chief petty officers call each other brother and sister. And I was like, I'm going to be a chief petty officer. Like, I'm going to have a family like that. So I kind of felt that, when I made chief at my halfway point, that I was going to be able to talk to somebody about my eating disorder. I thought that I was going to be able to talk to my CMC or my mentor or anybody else, my peers, going through the season with me. I thought I was going to be able to talk to them about it. And I tried here and there and brought it up here and there. And I realized several times over that it's taboo. People don't like to talk about it and they don't know how to talk about it.
Welcome to Your Story Doesn't End Here, the mental health podcast of military and veterans who refuse to be silenced. I'm your host, Rachel, and my mission with this podcast is to be a voice for those who don't have a voice, bring awareness to mental health issues, provide value and solutions, and to change the culture when it comes to mental health within the DoD organizations. Hey everyone, thank you so much for coming back for another episode of Your Story Doesn't End Here. Today, my guest is Leah Stiles, who is a retired Navy senior chief. We are going to be talking all about chief season, the little wooden box, and we all, of course, want to know what's inside that little wooden box. I know I did when I was serving active duty, and it was such a secretive thing. And so I'm really, really excited to have this conversation today with Leah. Her and I met a couple months back, and it's always such a delight talking to her. And so you're going to love this conversation today. So stay tuned for what is to come. But Leah, thank you, first of all, for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And so if there's one word or a few words you could use to describe how you are feeling going into this recording today, how would you describe that?
I am feeling optimistic.
Love that. Awesome. So I'm first of all, before we get into the deep conversation that we're going to get into, I just want to give you a minute to just tell the listeners a little bit more about you and who you are and a little bit about what you do.
Okay, great. So, like you said, I'm a retired Navy senior chief. I retired in 2021. The day that I retired, my husband retired as well, and we packed up that day and moved to just outside Disney. So, I'm down here in sunny Orlando, Florida. I love it down here. In my retirement, I found myself on the path of owning a nonprofit organization. So I founded Sea Waves, and I know you know a little bit about it, but I'm really excited to tell more.
Yeah, I am. I'm excited for you to tell the listeners more. I think the one thing that I have learned in just the conversations that we've had and then expanding conversations to other people is that what you do specifically with Sea Waves is something that really isn't talked about a whole lot in not only the military community, but even outside of the military community. And so I don't know where you do want to start this talking a little bit about the Sea Wave stuff, or what are you thinking? Are you thinking getting more into the what everyone's waiting to hear part of the conversation?
Let's lead with that and hope that they want to stick around to hear more about Sea Waves, because I think it makes a little bit more sense to explain the box, to explain things with the season, and that will show why I'm so passionate and really felt I had to found Sea Waves.
Awesome. We'll do that. So I think for me, I only made it up to E5 in the military. And so, there's different like ranks, right? For, anyone who is listening that doesn't know military structure. Enlisted, E1, E2, E3, E4, E5, E6, E7. I think it goes up to E9.
Yeah.
Correctly. Yeah. It's been a few years. And so anyway, E5 is like, from a leadership perspective. But actually, Leah and I had a really good conversation the other day about the different kind of leadership structures between the junior enlisted versus the upper enlisted, and how one is more teamwork based and one is more like a dog eat dog world, right? And I love that description, and I think I kind of want to start there because for me that was such a eye-opening conversation that we had. And so just talking about how that mindset can go into veteran life. And I'll let you kind of take this from there.
Yeah, so what's so cool about the Navy and the Navy Chiefs Mess is that we are the only branch that has such a big transition from one rank to the other. So E6 to E7 in the Navy is really a big deal. We change our uniforms. We go through 6 weeks of initiation and learning and growth and training. There's a huge ceremony at the end. It's the pinning ceremony. We all have seen those in the pictures with the tears, and they're so beautiful. So it's a really cool thing about the Navy. I joined the Chiefs Mess in 2011 and been there ever since. And so I've gotten to see some really awesome experiences every year during the season. Us Chiefs sometimes call it Chiefs Miss because it's like Christmas,
Yeah.
but yeah. So it's really exciting to see a lot of the people that you've led and mentored along the way really get that announcement and then welcome them in and then show them the ways and then give them their shiny gold anchors on September 16th.
Yeah, that's awesome. And the thing I think, I don't know, would you say that it compares to like the boot camp experience, or do you think that it's completely different because it's a different point in career? Because you make these comparisons, right? Where it's like you get your pin, okay, you get your ball cap. There's tears, okay, there's some tears here. Like you go through physical things. Would you say it's the same, or do you think for you it felt different?
I hadn't thought about that until you just brought that up. But I can absolutely see the comparisons, how you in boot camps, what was it, 8 weeks for me, I
Eight
think.
weeks. Yeah. Yeah.
And do you remember like day one when you were your own person? You didn't know anybody in the group,
Yep.
or if you even still wanted to be there.
Yep.
And by the time you guys are marching at the graduation in your new uniform and families clapping, and it's this whole thing. And not only are you super excited about it being yourself that you graduated, but now you've bonded with all
Yeah.
these other people, right? And of course, people have their ones that they're closer to than others, but at the end of that time, you're all a team. And that is very comparable to so the big picture of what happens during the Chiefs season is it's that building of the team. You go through things that where you're tired and you're hungry and you're physically exhausted and you need each other to get through.
Yeah. And so, this kind of brings up a couple of different thoughts for me. The first being that it's almost like this kind of like rebirth is where my thoughts go with this, right? Because if it is so similar to boot camp, where you're tired, you're leaning on the people around you, you're doing team building skills. Because I mean, realistically, in boot camp, you also do team building skills, and so it's almost like this like rebirth is how I picture this of like, this is your second phase of your career in the Navy. And so I can see, I mean, I think where my mind has gone for so long when it comes to this, like the toxic side of the Chiefs mess, which comes up so much in conversation. I mean, people will really berate the Chiefs mess when it comes to leadership a lot of times. And it's not to say that every chief is bad. I've met some incredible chiefs, and I don't want to knock the good leaders out there because I've met them, I've worked with them, and there are some phenomenal ones out there. But I think there's this continuing conversation that exists throughout the military and veteran world about the toxic chiefs mess, toxic leadership. And my mind had always gone to, what is it specifically about the chiefs mess that makes it so toxic? And so you had brought up something in one of our past conversations about how when you're an E5, when you're an E6, you're very much for yourself. It's like dog eat dog world. You're individually competitive. You're trying to make it to that point where you are a chief selectee, right? But then when you transition into the Chiefs world, then now you have this teamwork mentality. And it's like this switch that has to happen. And so I think what for me was so profound about that is if you look in the veteran world, you see these traits carry on from the active duty world. You see a lot of these people that are doing 20, 30 years and they get out as chief, senior chief, master chief, they're looking for something as a veteran that I think creates camaraderie. And this is just my perspective from the outside looking in. And then if you look at a lot of the junior enlisted, a lot of us, when we get out E5, E6, E4, a lot of us don't want to ask for the help. And it's not to say that you don't have your, chiefs that retire and they don't want to ask for help either. But I think this is just kind of my outside perspective looking in is like, wow, there really is this like full mindset shift that I didn't realize existed. That I guess I knew it existed, but I didn't realize that it was such a this like profound change between like, okay, today you are an individual, tomorrow you are this like member of a team. And it just was this like light bulb moment in my head.
Well, Rachel, I think you really nailed it on the head with like the whole rebirth analogy, because that's it. For me, it's especially interesting because I made chief at my 10-year mark. So that was literally my halfway point to my 20-year career. And yes, so when you look at it as like that refresh, that restart as well, it's really a good analogy of it. And not only for the chief selectees, right? Also for all the genuine chief petty officers that are coming out and being a part of the season to get the new ones in and take them under their wing and get them through the 6 weeks. So it's really a rebirth for them too, right?
Yeah.
And so again, that's where we even get refreshed in our networks again. We're PTing with them when we wouldn't normally the rest of the year PT with them or see them at different training events and stuff. So it really reconnects all levels of the mess. But while I'm there, I want to touch on the toxic and the disgruntled and that because it's there. We know it's there. The Chiefs
Yep.
know it's there. Everybody knows it's there, right? So let's talk about it. I think that's
Yep.
going to be the theme in this conversation. Let's talk about it.
Yep.
So what I noticed when we have a bad apple, when we have a bad apple, 9 times out of 10, it's because they've strayed from the mess, right? And they're going through something.
Mm.
So it's no excuse whatsoever to take it out on anybody you're leading. But let's put ourselves in those chief shoes for a minute of you're facing burnout. You're leading more than you've ever led before. You're working more hours than you've ever worked before. You're responsible for people, money, budgets, aircraft carriers, aircraft, like your responsibility level is huge, right? And so this is what's so important too is you need the mess to help you do that. If you stray from the mess, it's too much for one person to handle. So what happens? They get miserable. They get burned out. Sure, they suffer with mental health, right? Chiefs suffer with mental health issues. And so it might not be something because your chief isn't going to tell, third class petty officer like, hey man, I was up with PTSD all night, so I'm a little
Right.
cranky and short today, right? Because it doesn't allow for that in our professionalism among the ranks, right? And the stigma among the ranks. You want to feel that you can trust your chief with absolutely everything and anything. And so I think that's also where it gets a little personal too, when people deal with like miscommunications and misrelationships with their chain of command, is because they don't always get to see everything, right? Like
Right.
they don't get to see what's in the little box.
Yeah. Yeah.
They don't always get to see what's on your plate in your email and in the mess, right? That's why we eat alone. That's why
Yeah.
we eat alone, is so that we can refresh each other, pick each other back up, find each other, figure out who's like needing what help at what time. And that makes us stronger, right?
Yeah.
So if you get the apple that's just souring itself and isn't coming back for like the refresh, the recharge, and the help, they're going to spiral, and
Yeah.
then that's what's going to be what people remember, right? Because you don't always remember the chief that like had your back just a little bit. The ones that really had your back, of course you remember them, but
Right.
the middle ones, we don't remember them. You
Right.
remember the top ones in your world and the difficult ones in your world. It's just kind of how we remember things.
Right. And then when you talk about like the sour apple, the spoiling apple, I think that's where you start to see those really incredibly toxic messes as a whole, because I've heard of it in a lot of places. I've seen it where it's not just one individual, right? It's like a whole slew of people that are all just kind of in their own realm of toxicity. But when you have that analogy of the bad apple that can spoil the bunch, and I don't even think this is necessarily just in the Chiefs mess world. When I reflect back on my own career in the Navy, and I talk about this a lot on this platform, I felt like I was so disgruntled coming into work every day because that was just the environment, right? Like, I really, for the most part, to be completely honest, I probably didn't have a reason to be disgruntled most days. I showed up to work, there was literally nothing to be mad about. And I was just mad and frustrated because that was just the environment. And so I think, when you talk about this bad apple spoiling the bunch, it goes for the entire command, the entire Navy. I mean, it's just that's what people can do to each other by having a bad attitude or maybe having certain feelings about something. Then, and I personally, I like vulnerability in leadership, but I've also experienced people taking advantage of vulnerability in leadership. And so I understand why chiefs feel like they can't just come in and be like, I was up all night because of PTSD, or, sharing their deepest, darkest secrets with people, because not everyone is honest enough, unfortunately, to be able to handle things like that. And I guess I don't know that that's necessarily a one size fits all answer to things. I think a lot of it's individualized. And I think that's why you see across different commands, people have really great experiences with amazing leaders. And where you see other commands where people are like, nope, the Chiefs mess is toxic, hate them all, don't ever want to be in the military. But experiences like that can truly make or break someone's career. And so I'm so glad that we are talking about this and having this conversation, because I think just hearing some of these different experiences and some of these different maybe reasons behind things can hopefully be healing for some people. I think I'm one of those people where if I hear kind of a different perspective, it's like, oh, well, it wasn't me, or maybe part of it was me, but just taking that responsibility for myself and then understanding that you're right. Everyone's going through their own shit at the end of the day, right? Like, that leader was just an E6 a week ago, and now all of a sudden they're thrust into this position. And that's not an easy thing to do. And not everyone can handle that.
Yeah, exactly. And who are you going to tell that you can't handle it? You
Right.
know the stigma as much as I do, that you're not going to say that. You're not going to say, no, thanks for that promotion that I just climbed to the top to get. Like, no,
Right.
thanks. I'm going through a divorce, or I'm having bankruptcy, or, any of the other issues that we go through as people, right?
Yes.
Well, don't stop during the season.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've seen it all the time. I mean, I have friends that went through chief season pregnant. I know people that went through chief season and they never wanted to be a chief, but they're like, well, I got this promotion. I guess I might as well. Right. I mean, that is probably one of the most rampant things I've seen, is like, oh, well, it was going to get out, but then, I made chief, so I guess I'll stay in. And so, like, that's a whole different mindset shift from the like, I'm ready to get out. I've accepted that I'm no longer be in the military. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, just kidding. Now you're a chief. And I can't imagine that's easy.
Right. Well, that ties back to what you were saying, you know, especially our junior sailors. Your first command is just what you think the entire Navy is, and with good reason. You're there 4 or 5 years, and what you experience is what you think everything is. And so if your first chief, right, is one of those newly selected chiefs that really wanted to not be in the Navy at all, and now they got to like wear khakis and act like they care if they really didn't, or and maybe they have a reason for not being able to care. Like I said, maybe there's things going on at home and they cannot give what a junior sailor needs in their chief, right? So
Yeah.
it's not just like, oh, they won't give it. Some of them don't have it to give. But then there's other situations like I feel bad. I feel like my last duty station, first of all, it was not orders that I wanted at all. It was in a platform that was not in my career portfolio at all. So it was a completely new platform. So I didn't want to learn all that at the end of my career. And I had a toxic leader there myself.
Yeah.
And so I was shielding my team from the toxic leader all the time. And now I know, looking back, how burnt out I was, how I was trying to focus on retirement and wanting to build my dream house near Disney. And, I got out right at the COVID time. And, my son was a junior sailor and my husband was trying to retire. And we were, almost empty nesting. And I'm really sure that my 2020 and 2021 sailors did not get the best version of senior chief that they could have, they should have, or that my 2012, 13, 14 sailors did, right? Because that
Yeah.
was just the fresh. So I think that should like help us look at a perspective too of if that's your chief at your first command and that's what you see, you're gonna carry that with you, right? Or
Yeah.
you talk with each other and you're like, wait, so your chief doesn't yell at you? Like, oh no, yours doesn't? Oh, and we talk with each other, but outside of that, how are you supposed to know what else it's like?
Right. And so I want to shift the conversation just slightly because you were a female chief, senior chief in the Navy. And I think there were experiences that not only I had, but I hear even guests that have come on the show that talked about how coming up as a junior sailor, as a female specifically, they were told certain things like, the guest that said that she was told you're either a bitch or a slut. Certain struggles that I think females go through in the military that maybe males don't go through, or that I haven't heard males necessarily go through because females obviously haven't been in the military as long as males. And so, did you experience as a female coming up in the military things that you felt were just kind of different than your male counterparts, or things that maybe were more toxic specifically in the female leadership in general?
So I'm gonna go with the yes and no, right? And
Okay.
let me answer both. The no is gonna be that I'm finding more and more that everybody else has their own flavor of challenge and indifference and hurdles that keep them back, right? And
Right.
so there's not too many that I would specifically say is more of a female issue than a male issue. For example, I experienced MST more than once in my career. But I also know males that experienced MST as well. And so that's not just a female issue.
Right.
Did it make it extremely difficult to be a female in the Navy and keep going and get myself together after those times and trust my shipmates and have camaraderie and all of that? Yeah, definitely. But that's not exclusive to just females.
Right, right. Yeah, I think that's another one of those things that it just depends on who the leadership is. And it depends on, I think what I've really put together is it depends on how that leader came up. What I think I've seen with a lot of female leaders that give maybe bad advice to junior sailors is that they were just given bad advice and they're kind of in a bit of a survival mode themselves. And they're like, well, listen, this is all I know. So this is what I'm going to pass on to you. And maybe with the best intentions.
Or at least sometimes, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't think everything was always good intentions.
No.
I had my own experiences where I'm like, okay, and even those experiences, I look back and I'm like, I know that person was going through something at home with family. And so, I can look at it from a different perspective now. But yeah, I mean, there are these little things that are, I think, very specific to certain people, maybe specific to commands, areas, which is why now I think I'm such a huge proponent to maybe we don't focus on an entire nation of problems. Maybe we try to focus in our local areas. And that's what we task people with is focus on your command, focus on the people around you. And maybe that is enough for the brain to comprehend to be able to make these changes that need to be made. And so I don't want to get too off topic with that. I do want to get into the part that we alluded to in the very beginning, which is talking a little bit about chief season and the little wooden boxes and what's inside them. And I think this is such a well-timed conversation because we're in chief season right now, right? I think they started already, or is it starting soon? I don't know.
It
Uh,
started.
it did start. Yeah. Okay. So I know it was maybe a week or two ago, I started seeing all the congratulations posts on Facebook and congratulations to so and so for making chief. And I actually, because I joined the Navy in 2015, I'm starting to see people that I went to boot camp with that are picking up chief. And there is this like sense of like, wow, I'm really proud of you for that because, that's huge. And just seeing that growth as people and like I got out, but to see them being able to do something that prestigious for themselves. But there is that like secretive part of chief season, and we talked a little bit about the toxicity that I think makes some people feel a little bit of fear for their friends that make chiefs. There's also that pride piece that makes people feel proud of their friends that make chiefs. And so let's just talk about it, as we said was the theme. Whatever you want to share with the listeners about the secrets of chief season.
Well, of course, I am a senior chief. And once you're a chief, you're always a chief. So I cannot spill all the secrets.
Darn.
But I know maybe in future podcasts, I don't know, we'll give a little bit each time. But I do think that this is perfect timing with us being in chief season and what I've been working on the past couple of weeks. And which is my charge. I've been writing my charge to the mess, and I asked you earlier if you knew what that was, and because sometimes some people, if you have like a family member that's a chief, or you live with somebody that's a chief, like my son saw his mom go through the season, and now he's IT too, but he kind of knows what was in the box. So there
Yeah.
are some people, right, like that know little bits, and so they're not really all that secretive to where I don't think that there could be a good learning lesson about talking about it.
Right.
So the box, time honored tradition. I believe that vessels went back, as early as the first chief petty officer. And so what we call that little wooden box is a vessel. And so they're all handmade. Well, I don't want to meet the chief selectee that bought a pre-built box. But everybody else is handmade, and you make them together. So it's sentimental that you make it together. But I think what's in the box is more important than the box itself. And so that is a coveted, what we call a charge book. And again, that's as old as time as well. And really, I think that the process of having a charge book should not be hidden or secretive. Yeah, not everybody needs to see in it, right? That you have to earn that with your time and your rank, right? But I think that it's important to know what's in it. So I'm going to tell you when a chief selectee is ready for their vessel and ready for their charge book. So the vessel keeps the charge book safe and protected and locked in, and it should really be coveted because it is. And the purpose of this book, and there's plenty, but the one we're going to talk about today is that as they're going through a 6-week season, they have the opportunity all day, every day, to be with genuine chief petty officers. And so these are people that have made it either a year before them or 20 or 30 years before them. So these are the people that have paid those paths, have seen those things, they've bumped their heads, they've done the leadership thing. And pretty much you can guarantee if you're about to go through it, somebody else already has, right? So I look at the charge book as the opportunity whenever you're meeting another genuine chief petty officer. So whether it's at your own command or you go visit other commands, or you see we have these big events where everybody kind of comes together, and it used to be car washes. We don't do car washes anymore, but everybody thought the car washes was because we like to wash cars or make money, but it was
Nope.
really just something to do while we were bringing the chiefs and the selectees together is really what it was.
Yeah.
And so you have that book, and there's a right way and ways you have to learn, but the big picture is you're respectfully requesting the senior chief petty officers, the genuine chief petty officers, to impart their wisdom on you, to give their pearls of wisdom, to give their little guide of different things that they've learned along the way. And so they get a half a page or a page to really be able to jot down what they think a new selectee could benefit from or know. And then most of the time, the genuine will sign on the bottom their name in a way to get in touch with them. Because as you and I talked about the other day, what is it that makes the Chiefs mess work? What is it that makes us successful, time honored over and over again? And it's our network. That's the secret. It's our network. And it's our participation in that network, right? Because I know that once I became a chief, the things I tried to do for my sailors as an E5 or E6 that I just couldn't accomplish on my own, when I became an E7 chief, I now knew where to get those problems solved. I know somebody in every single rate at pretty much every single command, right? And so if I have a sailor that's transferring and needs to get a pay issue correct, well, now I know who the yeoman chief is at their gaining command, things like that. So the power is in the network. So to welcome these new selectees in, we have to show them how to network. We do that with the charge book.
Before you get any further, I actually do have a question from your personal perspective. Do you think that it would be beneficial to learn these skills prior to becoming a chief? Or do you think that there is something special about learning them as a chief, new chief?
When you say skills, you mean like
Like,
networking?
yeah, like the network, reaching out to people. I mean, I know my opinion on this, and I guess I don't understand why the military doesn't push that prior to chief. And maybe it's because it makes it more profound becoming a chief. I'm not sure, but I'm just curious what your opinion is on that.
So I think that we do offer opportunities for that for the ones that want that earlier than being a chief.
Okay.
So I know certain places, well, almost most places have a first class petty officer association,
Yep.
right? Some of the ones that are getting like really excited about being in the first class petty officer association, a lot of the E5s will make their own like second class like association.
Yeah.
And so that's the baby steps of coming up to it, right? You know as well as I do, if we mandate these things, it's not going to give the intended purposes. Like you
Right.
can't mandate teamwork and camaraderie and networking, right? So some of that you do need the experience of your own career to really be able to use that kind of network to the fullest. It takes us 6 weeks of constant training and mentorship to embed that in a CPO selectee.
Right.
So
Of course, you still have your people that still don't fully grasp that. I think we talked about that too, is that there's still their onesies and twosies that are afraid to still reach out to the network even after that 6 weeks.
that's when we hope the next year gets them or the year after that.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're saying earlier. If they're not coming out to these events, if you have a chief that is not at a CPO pinning on CPO pinning day, then they've kind of pulled themselves back and for one reason or another, they're struggling in one way or another.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you said that though, because I think when I was active, I didn't realize that these different associations were an opportunity to network. I think I just saw them as like volunteer opportunities and fundraisers because those are like what's really instilled when you're a junior enlisted is like volunteer, volunteer, MOVSM. It looks good for your eval. And so it's another one of those individuality things. But I also don't think I was at commands that had a really strong junior whatever association. I don't remember what they're called. Or like some of them didn't even have really a second class petty officer association. And so, it really just probably varies per command and what that group of people really wants to do and instill in people. But I think the concept of networking has been so valuable in my life outside of the military that I'm like, man, if people just knew early on that networking will literally bring you more places than trying to do it by yourself. Like,
Every time.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. But I do want to talk a little bit more about the charge book because the first question you asked me before we even started recording is if I knew what a charge book was, and I'm like, no, I don't. So, for the people who are listening and who are also wondering the same thing, but you went into it, you explained what it was, but if you could expound a little bit more about, what are these people putting in these charge books for these new chief selectees?
Right. So, everybody has like their lessons that they've learned along the way, and it definitely changes from year to year. And where that genuine chief petty officer is in their journey as well. A first year chief isn't going to write the same things that like maybe an 18-year chief would, right? So it's personal and it's different, which is another reason why it's coveted, is because we need to know that we can be real and raw and vulnerable and pour out what we really need you to know or want you to know without there being that I guess just like that public view of stigma that it would be open to if it was just a open source document, right?
Right.
So for me personally, my charge has absolutely changed over the years. At different times, my charge was this is how you can balance work and family because that was something I struggled with,
Yeah.
right? I wanted to give the Chiefs mess 100%, and I wanted to give my command 100%, and I wanted to give my husband 100%, and I wanted to give my kids 100%, and the math is not mathing, you know?
Right.
And
Yep.
so
Yep.
I struggled with that for a long, long time. I'll honestly say I struggled my entire second half of my career with that. No, I take that back. I struggled my entire career, right? Because even before you're a chief, you're in that competitive, like you said, get your volunteer hours, get all, get all these things, get your degree, get
Yep.
all your quals and your warfare pins and all those
Yep.
things. And having that work-life balance was just so difficult for me. So anything that I have learned along the way, if a young chief or a selectee would come up and ask me for my insight, most of the time I was going to go there with it and just, what I have learned, like what you probably don't want to do, those kinds of things.
Right. And so then you shared with me recently what your charge is now, which isn't related to work-life balance. Do you want to expound on what you are sharing more of these days?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is really where Sea Waves comes in. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. I I have gotten better over the last 2 or so years in my retirement at being vulnerable and sharing personal information. And I've learned that sharing this information it's helpful to other people, right? It might be difficult for me in the moment, but having these conversations and being able to talk about it is what helps. Not only for me, but more importantly for people that are listening that need to know that they're not alone. They need that validation. They need to know somebody else has gone before them with an issue like this and they've survived it and did well with it. And I think that's why my story seems to really intrigue people because I was a very, what we call squared away senior chief, right? I accomplished all the things, Sailor of the Year 2 years in a row, like all the little, love me wall things. But Rachel, the entire time that I was serving from day one, until well past retirement, I was struggling with various eating disorders. And that's still hard for me to say, right? It's just hard to say. So when I was giving these charges all these years, there was information inside of me that I had that I could have been giving on mental health issues, on eating disorders that nobody else is talking about. They're so in the dark and they're so taboo, and they're another one of those conversations that people just don't know how to talk about. And I certainly didn't. Um, but along, my career and my leadership growth, I was also able to identify because I had an eating disorder all those years. Who among me had an eating disorder, right? I was able to identify my peers and those that I lead, and even my bosses that had eating disorders, right? Like or disordered eating and disordered behaviors, and I knew all along what we do in the Navy, before a PRT or a BCA or before Jeeps pitting. I knew that the things that we do to shrink our bodies in a short amount of time, as much as we can, as fast as we can, I knew that that was wrong and disordered and unhealthy. And, but when you're in it, you're like right there, like eyes up on it, it's not that easy to identify, right? And then
Right.
for me, camaraderie is like the thing, not to go too far off a tangent, but I grew up in foster care and all I ever wanted was a family. Like that was it. That's what I wanted. That was a family. And so when my recruiter told me that the Navy is like a family, I was like, sign me up, put me in, right? And then like a year or so into it, I heard that chief petty officers call each other brother and sister. And I was like, I'm gonna be a chief petty officer. Like, I'm gonna be a chief petty officer. Like, I'm gonna have a family like that. And they're gonna call me brother and they're gonna call me sister, right? Like, well, they're not gonna call me brother. I'm gonna call them brother.
Yeah, yeah.
So I kind of felt that, when I made chief at my halfway point, that I was gonna be able to talk to somebody about my eating disorder. I thought that I was going to be able to talk to my CMC or my mentor or anybody else, my peers, going through the season with me. I thought I was going to be able to talk to them about it. And I tried here and there and brought it up here and there. And I realized several times over that it's taboo. People don't like to talk about it and they don't know how to talk about it, right? And they don't know how to respond. It's just not one of those things that we've normalized. But
Right.
what we've normalized is the crazy things that we do to help each other shrink our bodies. And by that, I mean intentional dehydration, right? Stay in the sauna for as long as you can, and then we would help each other. Like, don't get out before I do, we'll see who can stay longer. And I'm like, after we had already taken laxatives before we got in there, or drinking a magnesium citrate like it's going, out of stock, or some of us are smearing hemorrhoid cream all over our stomachs and wrapping and plastic wrap, and then getting in the sauna and challenging each other not to drink any more water because you're going to have to go back in the sauna. And then after we've done through all that, it's like, you know, who's going to be the spark plug with the energy and the cheerleader that's going to get us all back out onto the track and running laps? Because that's what we need, because we're not going to have one of us fail and not get their anchors on the day when all of their family has shown up and all of their loved ones are there and their peers are there and people from all these different commands are there and their mentors and their mentees. That was the hardest for me. The mentors and the mentees, seeing them is like when you are really, called to the carpet to ask yourself if you are doing the right thing and if you will continue to do the right thing. I think that's where my obligations and my loyalty has really, fallen there. But I was able to identify through my, second half of my career where that was and who I could talk to, who I shouldn't talk to, and who I would never, ever talk to.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for the people listening that aren't super familiar with how BCAs and PRTs go in the military, this unfortunately, the different things that Leah just mentioned aren't just specific to chiefs. That is all across the ranks when it comes to, I mean, I was the person doing the hemorrhoid cream and the saran wrap on my stomach because I was afraid I was going to fail a PRT. I think there's definitely an added pressure when you know that you won't get your anchors the next day if you don't pass these specific things. But the toxicity that is created mentally from every single year doing these things and having this, like, it's like the Sunday scaries, but for a PRT and BCA every year, right? It's like, you're getting taped or weighed in front of people that you work with every single day. I don't necessarily want people to see my body like that, but I have to because my weight bracket as a 5'6" female in the military was 163 pounds. I was barely 163 pounds when I joined the military, and I was never 163 pounds again after like my boot camp, maybe my A school weigh in. And so, there's so much, I think, mental and physical exhaustion and trauma that comes from doing this over and over and over and over for all these years. And then placing this almost worth on it. Like, if you don't pass this, then you don't get to do this thing that is like this mark of you did it, right? Or like if you don't pass this, I mean, there for a while, you would get like kicked out of the military or couldn't re-enlist if you
Mhm.
didn't pass a BCA or a PRT. And there's so much
You get
worth
a
and
bad
value.
eval, right? You get a
Yeah.
bad eval, and that stays on your record. So now you're worried, are you ever going to make chief? Because
Right.
got you have that on your eval. It would stop your orders if there were certain orders that you had gotten and you didn't pass your PRT before executing your orders. There was just plenty of consequences,
Right.
not even touching the stigma and the bullying that
Right.
comes along with, what we used to call FEP, the fitness enhancement program. What were some of the names that you guys called that program?
Oh man, I feel like there was like a fat camp or something
That's
somewhere
what it
in
was.
there. I mean,
The
God, I
Fat
can't even
Kid
remember all of
program.
them, but yeah, I mean, it was always something that was very demeaning. And
Mhm.
so people didn't want to do it. And the Navy would always be like, well, no, 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 the purpose is to help you. So big Navy is like, no, 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 like we're not trying to make this like a bad thing. It's supposed to be a good thing. But when I tell you, I was an ACFL for a little bit. For those listening that don't know what that is, it's command fitness leader, assistant command fitness leader. And my command didn't even have a FET program. Like it was an absolute joke because the mission came before
Mhm.
the physical part, right? And so we didn't PT as a command. FEP was like non-existent. People didn't show up to it. If they did, we're like, yeah, just go work out on your own. And people wouldn't work out on their own.
Mhm.
And so it's almost like setting people up for failure in numerous ways. Like on one hand, you have these places that do FEP and it's like the stigmatized thing. And then on the other hand, you have commands that maybe don't prioritize physical health and well-being. And like in my personal experience, I lived off of a lot of fast food. I lived off of a lot of vending machine food. Sometimes I didn't eat because it's just more work to leave the aircraft and have to check everything back in, turn it over to everyone. I'm just not going to eat. Like I'm good. And so, this is such a like multi-layered thing, right? That's not really a one size fits all answer. But I think when I want to dive a little bit more into what it means to have disordered eating or an eating disorder, because I think a lot of people's mindset goes to like anorexia, bulimia, stick. Oh, I don't see people walking around in uniform that have their bones sticking out, or I don't see people going to the bathroom to vomit all the time. So, like, what do you mean eating disorder? We don't have an eating disorder. And I feel like that old mindset of what an eating disorder is that has always been portrayed on maybe books and movies is where people's minds go when you
Mhm.
say disordered eating or an eating disorder.
Yeah, I think that's really important to kind of differentiate because I get asked that question a lot. So the way I like to look at it, that we used to have the stress continuum model where it was like green is good and red is bad, and the orange and the yellow, like you can be there a little bit, but you don't want to stay there,
Yeah.
right? So it's kind of the same with a same spectrum with disordered eating. So the green side is like intuitive eating, like you eat what your body wants and needs because your body wants and needs it. And then that yellow orange area is where I think so many of us in the military land is that disordered eating thing. And these behaviors that you see to shrink your body, every single one of them fall in this yellow orange category, if not red, which we'll get there in a second. And that's where we call that category is disordered eating, right?
Mhm.
Um, so one third of females and one fifth of males in the military community have an eating disorder. So they are in the red. They are in the red. But because this is underreported, undertreated, there's no screening in the military for this, people don't receive that diagnosis of you have an eating disorder. So then they don't relate that they have one, right? And then they don't even know that they need help or that they've extended, past that disordered thing and then over into the red. And so I think it's really important to just put out there that if you're in the yellow and the orange and you're struggling, it doesn't take a diagnosis to say that your struggle is real, that it's valid, it's difficult, and you deserve support. Whether you have that diagnosis, that one stamp, in your record or not, you deserve support.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think the tough thing and what really stood out to me was when you talk about lack of support, not only on the active side, but also on the veteran side, that this just isn't something that's widely recognized, that there's not subject matter experts on this. And when you told me, I don't know, are you comfortable sharing what you went through with your eating disorder in the military in the story that you told me about just not being able to get the help you needed?
Yeah, and that is because there's so much that we don't know. There's so much so many misconceptions and stigmas and beliefs
Right.
and so that is part of the reason why I founded Sea Waves. So what we do at Sea Waves, it's a long acronym. It's it's because Navy, we love our acronyms. It's support, education, awareness, wellness, and validation for eating disorders and self-care. The first three letters are what's most important. So the S with support. So there are subject matter experts, Rachel. They're just not in the military
Mm,
community.
yeah.
So what I do, and they're not accessible through TRICARE, it's an extreme hurdle battle and extremely difficult to get TRICARE approval for most eating disorder support.
Right.
So what I do at Sea Waves is I act as a bridge between the civilian eating disorder organizations and then the military community that needs them. And that means active duty, like you said, veterans, and family members. Family members are three times more likely to have an eating disorder than their civilian counterparts.
Mm.
So, all of the above, which is another reason why we're really excited to announce that we are now listed in Military One Source as the only eating disorder support veteran service organization. So you can find Sea Waves there now. I think the second piece is really important too, is the E for education. And that's why we developed the MEDAL program. So that's Military Eating Disorder Awareness and Literacy, is so that we can answer these questions, right? We can answer these misconceptions and eating disorders 101 and, learn that spectrum and what that looks like and how to be supportive and what not to say, right? What we should never, ever, ever say and things like that that are in that training because this information it definitely has to get put out. My commanding officer, where I made chief, and I worked for him for another couple years there at that command. That's where I was Sailor of the Year 2 years in a row, like under that same commanding officer who we won't name here. And I had so much respect for him, like my whole career. And he was very, very, very respectable, good man, good leader. Definitely worked hard for his people. In fact, my husband was his duty driver when they were stationed in Iraq together. So we had this bond with this leader, professional bond, but throughout our careers. And the very day that he found out that I had ruptured my esophagus from purging too much, that same day he called me into his office and I was actually relieved when I was walking down the P-way to get to his office. I was like, he's gonna help me. Like, I'm gonna get this off my chest. And then him and my CMC and that I know are good people, and I know that they are good people. They're gonna help me, and I'm gonna be okay. Like I'm gonna live, right? Because this was just a few months after my mother committed suicide, and it was really tearing me up. When he gave me permission to enter his office, he immediately stood me at attention and told me that there's no longer any place in his Navy for me. And that was not what I thought was going to happen. That was not the response. I didn't even know how to prepare for that. I was rock bottom, I was bleeding from my esophagus and, still taking care of my mother's affairs after her death. And it made it hard. So, am I angry or bitter? I'm really not. I'm really, really not. I'm hurt. I'm disappointed. It's extremely unfortunate because if I had received help in 2012 or 13, then maybe the rest of my career would have, taken a different turn, or maybe my eating disorder wouldn't have gotten so bad that I spent nearly 2 years in a hospital trying to recover. But he didn't know how to respond. He didn't know what to do. He hadn't received this training. He hadn't received any of this information before. And like you said, there's all these stigmas about what we think an eating disorder might be, or that we saw on the Lifetime channel or after school specials or different talk show hosts. And 9 times out of 10, when they said eating disorder, they showed like this little frail skeleton, malnutrition, eyes sunken in. And when I teach this mental training to other triads or other leaders, I've been starting by saying this, I want you to picture somebody with anorexia in your mind, right? Like we said, 1/3 of females and 1/5 of males in the military community have an eating disorder. So if you're leading your team of 30, how would you find those 10? How would you find those 10? And how would you find the ones with anorexia specifically, right? Because there's 6 eating disorders, there's not 3, and there's some that are actually eating disorders, but not in the DSM-5, so not diagnosable, but still absolute eating disorders. But the word that we recognize most is probably anorexia and what we think that looks like. And then I tell them that's my diagnosis, right? And so those that are listening and then don't see us, I do not fit the mold, right, of what people think anorexia is. But the facts are less than 6% of people with an eating disorder will ever be diagnosed as underweight. 94% don't reach that underweight medical category. So if you're looking for the frail, underweight skeleton before you get concerned about anorexia specifically as an eating disorder, as a leader, you're going to miss it 94% of the time.
Man, I hope if you're listening to this and you are a leader in the military, triad, E5, E4, I think you're a leader at every rank. I hope that you really, really let that sink in. And if you're active duty and you're listening to this, you know exactly what we're talking about. We've all been through it. We've all seen it. We've had friends that have gone through it. We just don't recognize it as a problem because it has been so normalized to cut weight for a PRT or a BCA. It's been so normalized to starve yourself. It's been so normalized to do unhealthy diets. I mean, Leah, how many times have we seen on these Facebook pages specific to maybe Navy enlisted or specific to just enlisted in general or, Navy or whatever have you, right? A military related Facebook page where someone's like, hey, I had a baby, I need to lose weight, breastfeeding. We talked about that in a prior conversation. Or I have to cut like 10 pounds in the next month or something. What do I do? And most of the conversations that, most of the comments from people genuinely trying to help are saying to do these awful things. But I think what was interesting to me too is when I was active duty and I knew that my weight wasn't where I wanted it to be. Not that I was at an unhealthy weight. I was 180 pounds, which is where my body feels good. But according to the Navy's chart, I was overweight. I went to a nutritionist and I said, can you help me? Like, can you help me eat healthier? Like, I knew I wasn't eating healthy, but I didn't know how. And she just pulled out the standard chart with the plate,
The plate.
Yep. You put this much food here, this much food here, this much food here. And I'm like, that's not support though. And that's not what I need. And I think even for me, I've been out of the Navy now 3 years and here in like 2 weeks. And I still struggle with my relationship with food. But I think that's very normalized in the veteran community, seeing the men get out and get the beer gut, women get out and either going ridiculously hard in the gym, which can also be unhealthy if it's overdone, or gaining a lot of weight. And a lot of us just don't know. Like, we just don't know how to like get out of that, right? Like this, I guess, feeling bad about my body because, it doesn't fit a certain number or whatever, right? And some people deal with this for 20, 30 plus years, being told 2 times a year, every year, you're not good enough in one way or another. And so I'm so glad we're having this conversation. Yeah, we could talk for probably another couple hours, but I do want to, I want to make sure that we hit on where people can find and support Sea Waves. But do you come into commands and do trainings, or can commands outside of your area get training on these specific topics from Sea Waves?
All of the above. We do Zoom opportunities for the commands I can't physically get to, but anytime I get the chance, I like to give this training, in person. And And so, yes, anybody that's looking that wants this training, wants to learn more, specifically right now, also our chief selectees, my charge to them is to learn about this, to challenge yourself, to educate yourself on what this really looks like and the danger. You know, the number one cause of death for somebody with an eating disorder is suicide. So these conversations have to happen. You know, eating disorders have the second highest mortality rate of all mental illnesses. And so, you know, while we talk about PTSD and you know, depression and these things, it is just as important, if not more, to talk about eating disorders too. We have to talk about it.
Mm.
We have to recognize it. We have to know what the triggers are. And then, like you were saying, people retire and then their body just does all these crazy things. Well, it's because they've yo-yoed, right? For 20 years, they've done this to their body or more. And then, last point on that too is just the older we get, the more our body changes, the harder it is to cut weight and shed weight, right?
Yeah.
And so now you're looking at how this is even affecting senior leadership
Yeah.
because I'll tell you, as a senior chief, 8 wanting to make 9, wanting to make CMC, wanting to make MCPON, I wasn't willing to fail. I wasn't willing to fail publicly or on that scale, no matter what, right? And so, it's interesting. My first inpatient treatment, the first time I was hospitalized, the very first person that I met was an active duty CMC that was there for his eating disorder, for his purging disorder. And so this is all through our ranks. It doesn't discriminate, right? He was getting older, a little bigger, and his cycle of purging and shrinking all the time caught up to him, and he needed inpatient hospitalization. So now we're talking about military readiness, right? He was the chief of a submarine, so
Yeah.
the chief of the boat. So you pull him off, and how's the submarine getting underway without their chief of the boat? So
Right.
yeah, there's so many different ways that this conversation could go, but it really boils down to the same thing with all mental health. You don't know who's struggling.
Mm.
There's no specific demographic, no age, no rank, no sex, no nationality. This is all of us. And this is something we all need to talk about. And I guarantee you, with the numbers that are out there, that you have somebody in your network that you care about that is absolutely struggling with an eating disorder. So I just know that it's there. Keep your eye out and be ready to be that shipmate, right? That we've talked. And when I say shipmate, I mean be that person for somebody, right?
Right.
Like outside of the Navy, outside of the military, right? Like be that person. You don't know if this is your daughter or your uncle or your cousin. And so yeah, we gotta be real. We gotta make this a topic that we can talk about. And that's really what's in my charge to the selectees is let's talk about it.
And I don't know if you said, I don't believe you did already. Where can we find you and how can we support you with Sea Waves?
So our website is ctechwaves.org and our social handle is at Sea Waves Inc. So either way there, and there's plenty of resources listed on our website, plenty of opportunity to learn more, get to know more. And breaking news, Rachel, I'm gonna drop this before we leave, but Sea Waves has just partnered with another organization that, once we get this program up and running, the military community, everybody in the military community will get free physician screenings for their eating disorder
Oh, that's awesome.
or
That's
disordered
incredible.
eating that they're not sure is an eating disorder. They will see this physician for free, and then they will have a paper that they can bring back to their primary care physician or their CFO, their command, and they'll have a piece of paper that says, "Help me talk about this."
That's huge. Well, congratulations. It's always so heartwarming and exciting to hear about the nonprofits that are out there physically making a difference and it's something tangible that is changing so many lives. There's so many incredible veteran nonprofits out there, and I love the missions of so many. I think Sea Waves is near and dear to my heart because it's something that isn't really being talked about on the same level as just kind of general mental health, which is still stigmatized, right? I mean, that's kind of the purpose of this platform, is like mental health in general stigmatized. But when you start to get into these little niche things, right, that, man, the stigma just like becomes even worse because people just don't know how to talk about it. So that's incredible. That is going to be life-changing for so many people. I'm actually very excited to take this information and disseminate it within the people that I know in my network, the base that I live next to. And I hope that other people listening do the same. I know that it's not always an easy topic, but even just educating yourself, taking the time to learn more about something so that you just understand it a little bit better. Educating yourself, sharing with other people. I always say at the minimum, follow, support social medias. That's free. But I think this is one of those things where I want to challenge anyone listening to this to not only educate yourself, but if you know people in the military, share this information. If you know leaders in the military, triads, people that are in those higher leadership positions, please, please, it is so important to share this information. Not everyone's going to take information like this and run with it, because
Right.
that's where the stigma part lies, right? But if they don't have access to it and don't even know about it in the first place, then they can't make that decision about whether or not it's something that's important enough to them to educate themselves on. So if you're listening, support, share. It's not a request, it's a demand.
It's an order from a senior chief.
Yeah, there you go, right? All right, Leah. Well, I am so appreciative that you came on here today. What an incredible conversation that is so needed, so necessary. And I'm really, really excited for this episode to launch. Are there any last words or a piece of advice that you want to leave the listeners with today?
Sure. Well, I really just want to explain why it's so important that we use the light waves, or the lighthouse at Sea Waves is because it's twofold for us. Number one, we know eating disorders thrive in the dark. We know they grow in the dark. So we want to shine a light on eating disorders, and specifically eating disorders in our military community. But the other thing is, we're all in the dark ourselves in our depression or in our own mental health at different times. So if you're able to be the light for somebody at that time, be their light. We're not meant to do any of this alone, right? Don't go through any of this alone. And especially to somebody that's listening, that is struggling with their relationship with food or their body, is just don't do this alone. And if you don't have anybody immediately that you can reach out to, just shoot me a message and say, let's talk about it.
Thank you for taking the time to listen in today. With your support, we are able to increase awareness of the mental health issues affecting service members and veterans today, with the goal of creating positive change. If you got value from this episode, please take 30 seconds to subscribe and share this episode within your own network. Until next time, remember, your story matters, your mental health matters, and your story doesn't end here.